We're gathered here today to talk about the family photos of Trude Fleischmann, who is our cousin, my brother Henry and I. And I just want to say that this collection would never have happened without Carrie Weber, who was simply remarkable in finding the images that were simply dreamed of for the collection, whether they be in institutions or in private collectors. I just had the thought, and by the next day, Carrie was able to acquire so many of these photos for this amazing exhibit. It also would not have come to fruition without Heike Herrberg, who is sitting right here, and her amazing book called Wiener Melange, Frauen zwischen Salon und Kaffeehaus, which simply means women between the salon and coffee house years. Heike contacted us more than 20 years ago, and from the time that she met with my family, our aunt Madeleine referred to her as our Heike. So this is our Heike. She is the biographer for Trude Fleischmann, and I hope you'll enjoy the beautiful photos that we have to share with you. Heike.
Thank you, Bobby. Yes, of course, there are countless photographs of family and friends that Trude Fleischmann took. And here in the exhibit, we only, of course, have a selection. And today we want to focus on some of them. And first, we would go to the beginning of the 20th century in Austria and start in 1915, perhaps, with your father, Bobby and Henry, your father Hans, and your aunt Madeleine. Bobby, would you like to take over?
Certainly. Probably the very first studio photos that Trude took when she was 19 or 20 years old were of our father Hans and his sister, our aunt Madeleine. You can see them on the wall here. I've always loved those photos of the tiny children in studio being photographed by Trude. When Madeleine was more than 100 years old, she still remembered what it was like. When I asked her, well, do you remember this? And she said, absolutely. She said she cried the whole time, but maybe she stopped just long enough for that photo to be taken. She also told us that that really was her own teddy bear that she brought with her, and she remembered it to be a very bright white room and that Trude stood very close to her when she photographed her. So they are beloved in our family, and it's exciting to see them on the wall here.
Yes, and now we have the photos of your grandparents, Paula and Heinrich Rosenberg, that I found always very impressing. And Henry, perhaps you could
Heinrich
tell
and
us?
Paula were, as you said, our grandparents, so they were Trude's aunt and uncle. And Paula was a musician and a piano teacher. Heinrich was a Kommerzialrat, which means a commercial counselor, and he had a reputation as someone who knew a lot about the Austrian economy. He was often in high demand to give public speeches on economic subjects. He had an interest in mathematics. He even published a paper on prime number theory, and I have no idea what prime number theory is, but it was well received. Everything changed, of course, in 1938 when Hitler took over Austria. There was no more Austria. Austria became just a part of Germany. And my grandfather had an office where there were a few employees. One of them was a typist who was never very good at her job, and people said, you should fire her, she's not a good typist. And he said, yeah, but she'll never get another job, so she's adequate, let's keep her. She was the one who denounced my grandfather to the Gestapo. He was arrested, sent to Buchenwald, which is an infamous concentration camp, and after some number of weeks, remarkably, he was released and he went back home. In 1941, my grandparents were both deported to Poland, where they were murdered by the Nazis. So Bobby and I never knew them, but one of the ways we do feel connected to them, of course, is through Trude's photos.
So history did very incredible hard affect your family, you know. That's
Yes.
yeah, and there are those photos of 1935 of Hans and Madeleine. What is the history behind that?
Well, there's one photo that demonstrates something that is often obvious in Trude's work, is that she always noticed people's hands. And you'll see that in a lot of her photographs. This photo was actually hanging on a hook in an attic closet in the house where we grew up. It was not prominently displayed in the house, but I always felt connected particularly to that photo because it shows my father's right hand, which looks exactly like, I got that hand. It looks like it should be my hand. My father played the piano really well, and I can't understand why I can't if I have those same hands. So I've always felt connected to that picture.
Yes. Great. And then the next photo to stay with the Rosenberg family is the photo of your mother, Ernestine, from 1944
Right.
in Connecticut.
Let me
So
go
yeah,
back.
what happened in between?
Yeah, so in 1932, my parents were both studying medicine in the University of Vienna. That's when they met. In 1937, my father graduated, got his MD degree. My mother was 1 year behind him. In March of 38, Hitler took over, and Jews were no longer allowed to participate in the graduation ceremony at the university. But there were two occasions when they set up special ceremonies so that the last few Jewish graduates could get out of the university. Those took place in a boiler room in the basement of one of the buildings. And my mother had to grab a taxi and run all over Vienna to get signatures and stamps from all her professors to certify that she had passed her exams. And then she made it to the boiler room in time to graduate, get her MD degree, which certainly came in handy. My parents got married in September of that year, September of 38, at a time when it was technically no longer legal for Jews to marry. But they found one clerk in the municipal office who probably didn't know his job very well, but he allowed them to get married. They stood under a large swastika there in the office. They were both pretty secular, but they went to the synagogue to have a religious ceremony. That couldn't happen in the sanctuary, which was all closed off and locked up. But there was a hallway in the back of the building where they were able to stand and get married. They went to my maternal grandparents' home, where there was a little celebratory gathering, which in itself was illegal and dangerous, because if anyone noted that there was a gathering of more than 3 Jews in one place, they could have been arrested. And it almost happened, and thank goodness it didn't. In December of 38, my parents were both able, fortunately, to get out and get to England. They flew. They actually traveled by air, and they weren't able to travel on the same day. And I can only imagine the stress of one of them. I don't know which one. One went
went
first. Hans went first, and then Ernestine went a few days later. In England, it wasn't really possible for them to work as physicians. My father briefly was able to do some kind of work with deaf children, and he always said that it was an advantage because they couldn't understand how imperfect his English was at that time, although he did know some English. My mother worked as a volunteer at a tuberculosis hospital in Manchester, and some of the things she saw there made her seem like quite the genius later when she came to New York and there were cases presented at the hospital. Nobody had any idea what this was. And my mother said, "Oh, I know, it's TB of the kidney. I've seen this before." So in '39, before Hitler invaded Poland, so technically before the war, they were able to come to the US, where they both had a series of jobs working in hospitals and clinics in New York, in New Jersey, in New London, Connecticut, in Lexington, Kentucky. And then by the time this picture was taken, our older sister, who unfortunately is no longer living, but our sister Sandy had been born, and the family had settled in Bridgeport, right near where we are today.
And by the way, you just mentioned Manchester, and do I remember it right that Madeleine as well went to Manchester,
yes,
your aunt?
Madeleine,
yeah.
who was Trude's first cousin, survived the war in Manchester, where she did factory work. She was very fortunate to get out of Vienna by applying for a job as a domestic helper. She took a course through the Jewish Kultusgemeinde, through the Jewish Community Institute, where they supposedly taught her to do some basic housekeeping skills.
Never good at it.
and therefore, when she arrived first in London, and she was welcomed to the house, and they said, get up early in the morning, make the porridge, and start the fire. And she didn't know how to do either of those things, but she was able to part on good terms with that family and get the factory job in Manchester.
Mm-hmm. And when did she go to, or get to New York? In what?
46, I think.
47.
47.
I was 11 months old.
Yeah, 47.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. We have this wonderful photograph of you, Bobby, with your sister and the golden heart necklaces.
Our invitation.
Yeah, the photo of the invitation. It's from 1951.
It's 1951 because, in fact, it was at the wedding of our aunt that you're just describing, Madeleine, with Moritz. And unlike huge weddings that we have today, it took place above, in the house where we lived on East Main Street in Bridgeport. Our parents had the office downstairs. This was the second floor where we lived. It was the small dining room, and a chuppah was set up there. And Rabbi Yakubovich was invited to conduct this ceremony. And Sandy and I were very delighted to wear those dresses and those necklaces.
Very proud. You look very proud.
We were very
yeah?
proud. And when people had asked, well, what was the context of that picture, the context was a very simple wedding. This was Madeleine and Moritz in the dining room of our house.
And I always say I was there because I was in my mother's womb.
Exactly. And when Trude took photos of you, like this one, did she ever say something like, show me a nice face or
Never.
smile or something like that? She didn't pose you at all?
She posed us, but she didn't pose our face.
Okay.
She might tell us to sit in this place or that place, but
But
never.
even then, we weren't really posed. It was just, oh, all of you go over there, that kind of thing. Do you think so, Henry?
There were times when she,
Yeah.
I think when she posed us, but I never heard her say, "All right, smile."
Like people today
Like,
do
yes,
for Instagram
yes,
or
yes.
something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
For And somebody told me, I don't know exactly, I don't remember who it was, that Trude sometimes used a trick to make people relax, that she had a button on her camera that she clicked, so people thought the photo had been taken, and then they relaxed, and then she took the real photo. But did you ever heard of that?
I never knew Trude to use that trick, and you might have evidence that she did, but I would have to be convinced it doesn't.
It didn't happen for us.
It certainly didn't happen for us.
Okay.
What did happen was that she would often send little Henry into the kitchen to get the bulbs for the camera. And it was always I think, an exciting moment, wasn't it, Henry, when you were?
I was happy to do that.
Good. Here we see the photograph of your other grandparents from 1952, the parents of your mother. Mm-hmm. What was their history?
Well, they were both from the Bukovina. The places where they were born are now on two sides of an international border. So our grandfather Herman was born in a place, Kiselica, which is now in Ukraine. And our grandmother, and actually our mother, were both born in Radec. And these were, they definitely considered themselves Austrian. And
it was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire at the time.
Part of the Austro-Hungarian
German-speaking.
Empire, German-speaking, not Yiddish-speaking, and they both learned languages like Romanian and Ruthenian, whatever that is, and my grandmother also spoke French, but their first language was German. Just before the beginning of the First War, the First World War, they left the Bukovina and with various adventures came to Vienna, where Hermann was able to start a knitting factory. He had a horn and hard art automat, which when I talk to people about that, a lot of people remember this place in New York City where you could put a nickel in the slot and open the little door and get your sandwich or your beverage. And people are surprised that there was such a thing in Vienna, but there was, and he owned it or managed it or whatever. And they had three children, the eldest being our mother, who was born in Radec, and the other two were born in Vienna. They were also fortunate almost at the last minute before the war started. They were also able to get to England. And
our uncle was on the Kinder transport to Manchester.
Our uncle, which is our mother's little
brother.
Went on a Kinder transport. And the in-between kid, our Aunt Paula, also was fortunate to be able to get to Manchester.
In 1962, you, Henry, made a trip to Mexico with Trude, and there is this gorgeous photo of you, and you look really like a Mexican boy.
That's what everyone says about that picture, me and my sombrero.
Yeah. And it was an exciting trip, I would suppose.
Well, it was complicated. Yes, it was an exciting trip. My mother was dying, and my parents learned that Trude and her nephew, Stefan Karel, were taking a trip to Mexico by car, and our maternal aunt, Paula, who is my mother's the younger sister, she was living in Mexico City. So it seemed like a way to get Henry away from this awful scene at home was that I would go with Trude and Stefan, which we did. We traveled by car. I actually kept, as a 10-year-old, I kept a diary, and when I look at it now, it's a sweet little thing, but there's not enough information in it. But one thing it does tell me is that we left New York at noon on this 5-day trip, no doubt because my father had to get me from Bridgeport to New York to begin the trip. But the rest of the trip, we always got up early, and the trick was to get an hour under our belts before breakfast. And in that context, Trude taught me one of her secrets as a photographer, which is that the best light is the first morning light, and she was often out. I have a picture in my mind, and somewhere I might actually have the picture of her taking a photo of a beautiful Spanish colonial church somewhere in a little town in the northern part of Mexico. And in that picture you can see a clock, and it's early in the morning. So Stefan, the nephew, he did almost all the driving. And in fact, I had never known Trude to drive. She often visited us coming from New York to Bridgeport, always by train. But evidently she did have a license, and one day on the trip, she thought she would do some driving, and that's what she did. Now we were in a Peugeot, which was very unusual. Other than VW Beetles, there were really no foreign cars in those days. In fact, if we had had a breakdown, we would never have found a mechanic with metric tools, but we didn't. And so Trude's driving in this Peugeot with New York license plates in the deep south. We're on a road that was recently paved, so it's all blacktop with no line down the middle of the road. And Trude started drifting over to the left a little bit too far, and she was stopped by a sheriff. And she showed her license, and she showed her registration, and she, amazingly, she got off with a warning. Stefan resumed driving. He turned onto a little small side road, and he gave Trude a driving lesson, which went on for about 15 minutes, and then the rest of the way, he did all the driving. So,
okay. Yeah, that's a big story behind that picture, no?
yes, absolutely.
And in 1969, so again a big leap, it was Trude's last year in the States before she left for Europe. And that was also the year of the moon landing, and that was a topic that she was very interested in, wasn't she?
Well, I will simply say, I mean, Henry has evidence in letter form, but I was present when Trude said that she would have given her life to go to the moon and see the beauty of the earth below. And that really struck me as powerful.
And she used space images. Often, she did a Christmas card every year. Some of them are on display here. Often there are space images. I think she actually used a lens cap to create a satellite in orbit around the Earth. And there's
also the wonderful postcard that she sent us of a Mexican head, like a small little, what would you call it? A little statue, a little tiny thing. And Henry, she told you how she created it. It was called Man on the Moon.
Man on the Moon. But she took a piece of cellophane and crinkled it up so that it looked like the lunar surface. And she had this little sculpture on it, or figure. I just wanted to say when she talked about how beautiful things are, I was thinking that if I made a list of all the words that she used, if you just listened, if you went through a whole week with her and took all the words and left out the articles, the ands and the this and that, but just looked at the substantial words, the word beautiful and the word perfect would be very high on the list. She saw beauty everywhere. She saw it in people's faces. She saw it in landscapes. And many times she would, if she wanted something and you would provide it for her, even if it was a glass of water, she would say, perfect.
And two words come to my mind when I think of Trude: darling and absolutely. When we would go to her studio and walk up those stairs and see what she was recently working on, she would say, darling, what would you like? I only wish I told her what I would have liked. You know?
So it was the studio on 56th Street in Midtown Manhattan.
Yes, and the other word is absolutely.
Yeah.
When she described either a musical experience, a person's theatrical work, she would say absolutely. When she described Marian Anderson, she was absolutely stunning. When she described Wilhelm Furtwängler's rendition of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, she said it was absolutely unique.
She said nobody understood Beethoven's Ninth. That Beethoven's Ninth, it was okay, it was good music. She understood that, she always knew that. She never got it until she heard his version.
And we actually have an essay here that she wrote about that and about Furtwängler, who was
and about Marian Anderson, whom she knew very well and photographed many times. But she first heard Marian Anderson in Vienna when she was a young unknown singer, and Trude went to some other concert, and it was I guess a building where there were several different concert halls. And at the intermission, she came out and ran into someone she knew who said, "You have to go hear this young singer. She's just spectacular." And Trude did go in there, and she and Marian Anderson, I guess, became friends.
And what we just talked about before, to that moon science, she said, I think she once said, well, it's, or she referred to the costs that
yes, she said everybody's complaining about the high cost of the space program. She says politicians are always going to waste money. If they're not sending rockets up, they're not going to be building nursing homes or hospitals or schools. They're just going to be wasting the money. So why not use it for something as beautiful as space?
And she said to you, let's fly to the moon.
She said, if I were younger, I would like to fly to the moon with you, with me.
Would you have liked it?
Yes, but I didn't. But I would like to come back to Earth too.
Yes. Apart from your family, the Rosenbergs, Trude had also close contact with other families, and she also took a lot of photographs of those family, of the friends. And for example, there is the Cornelius family, and we have these kind of, well, disturbing photographs of an SS officer, yes, a monk, and an aviator, I think.
Yes. Well, I actually had seen those photos at the Thorpe Gallery in the 1980s. I went to see Trude's exhibition. She was already living in Lugano. And I wrote to her because it really struck me. I mean, here is a photograph of an SS officer. How did she take that picture and why? And she wrote me a letter, actually 2 letters. One in German primarily, which had detail, and then another one in English. And I kind of will combine what she said in those letters. She said, actually, this was Willy Cornelius, brother of Otto. She said, I photographed them their entire lives. Their mother, Ermina, was my dearest friend. We have photographs of her in this exhibition. We have photographs of the 2 little boys, Otto and Willie here as well. And she said they were wonderful people. They were not Nazis. In fact, they hated the Nazis. She said that when Willie was doing his Freiwillige service, his volunteer 1-year service, the Nazis came and immediately put him into this uniform. And she said, in fact, in 1938, when the annex of Austria came, the Anschluss, they were advised by their mother to get out as fast as you can, and they escaped. And Trude says to Guatemala. I guess there were several South American countries. They were at some point in Cuba. So both boys who were in service, but Willie being an officer, escaped. And he ultimately became a monk. So the photos that we have of Willie are of him in childhood, then as a young, dashing man, as an aviator, then as an SS officer, and then as a monk in New York, where he returned. And she said she was very saddened at the time that she wrote it to me. He had just died the year before, not even 60 years old, as she said. So we are fortunate to have those photos that were loaned to us by Joanna Reuter, who is Otto's daughter, and she has been here for these wonderful opening events.
And Otto was a lifelong friend of Trude, as
Absolutely.
I remember, no?
Yes.
They did together a lot of skiing and walking
Yes.
and something like
Yes.
that, no?
Absolutely, and I was privileged to meet him when he was well into his 90s.
Yeah, I did so as well.
Yes.
In Vienna.
Yes,
yeah.
in Vienna.
And you just said the word absolutely.
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 It's one of your favorite words
I
as
guess
well.
so.
Yeah, and another important family for Trude was the Post family. And they were not relatives, but Helen Post was a very close friend of Trude. She and her sister Marion came to Vienna in the late 20s or early 30s and learned photography with Trude. And Helen, Marion first, Marion Post-Walcott, later became a well-known photographer as she worked for Farm Security Administration during the Great Depression. And Helen Post did a lot of research on Native American peoples in the South and Southwest, I think, and documented that in a book together with a Pulitzer Prize winner, Oliver Lafarge, no? Is his name, yeah. And Helen also was the person, or one of the friends, who convinced Trude to leave Vienna in '38. And she provided her with this affidavit, that the kind of guarantee to take, sponsorship to take over the costs in case that she wouldn't have been able to, no? And in the exhibit we have a lot of photographs that document the very close and intimate relationship between those two women.
And they were loaned to us by Helen's son, Peter Modley.
Yeah.
In fact, Carrie and I had to rent a van big enough to include the magnificent 40 by 40 photos of the Rosenberg farm, which are right here, yes, where Helen and Trude and Robert Haas spent vacation times.
And to mention also Helen's and Marion's mother, Marion Hoyt Post, who was a well, she became a kind of mother figure for Trude. She was very important for her as well. And she was a kind of a suffragette, a very progressive woman, who, an activist who fought for contraception and against racial segregation, and so I think a very interesting woman. Yes, and you just mentioned the Haas family, Robert Haas. He was around, a similar age as Trude. He was born in 1898, I think, in Vienna, and studied
calligraphy at some
typography and electrical engineering, and set up a graphic studio in Vienna in 1925. And in 1930 he learned photography with Trude. And well, so first he was her student, and then later he became a lifelong friend. Yeah, and as Trude's work, his work included portraits of many famous personalities, as Oskar Kokoschka, Marlene Dietrich, Arturo Toscanini. Yes, he was Toscanini's kind of
family photographer, right?
Yeah, private photographer, something like that. Yeah, and in 1938 he emigrated to New York via London, so the same way as Trude, and. He worked for the Guggenheim Museum, for the MoMA, and for a lot of universities where he taught typography and calligraphy. Because I think he wasn't allowed to work here as a photographer in the beginning, and so he came back to his typography thing. Yes, and this one thing I think I read somewhere in a letter that later, when Trude and Robert were old, they always, or not always, but often thought about what would be worse, getting deaf as Trude, or getting blind as Robert Haas did. No. Yeah. And if I remember it right, his daughter Kathy is also she was also a godchild of.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Can I just say one thing about her? Because I had the pleasure of meeting her last night for the first time. And when she was a little kid, she couldn't pronounce Trude, so she called her Truly. And Trude would write her letters and end the letter, "Truly yours, truly."
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, and perhaps some last words to Trude. In 1970, Trude Fleischmann left New York and went back to Europe. And this time she settled down in a small town near Lugano in Switzerland. And in 1984, for her upcoming 90th birthday, the Austrian Institute invited her for an exhibit here in New York.
We were there.
Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there is a photograph of her, being there, and.
There's a photograph that I took of her.
Yeah, you took it. Right. Yeah, sure.
Yes. Yes. And it's here actually on the wall when you first entered.
Ah, yeah, okay. Then, afterwards she went back to Switzerland, and then at some point she had an accident, and she became very frail. And her nephew, Stefan.
In those days, she ended her letters, "Deine uralte Trude." You're exceedingly old, Trude.
And he took her back to the States and took care of her together with his partner Pierre till she died in Brewster here in New York, upstate New York in 1990, I think. So that was.
But as you can see, her spirit does live on.
Yes, it sure does.
Yeah, we heard a lot of stories around all the family. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heike.